Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing in a different location because it can be loud downstairs. So, good to see all of you today. We're going to be talking about glory because of something I saw, some news that I saw, and I think I'm going to bring up one of my favorite topics, which I probably talked about before, but it's been a while because I don't remember the last time I talked about it. So, whatever. We always need to be reminded of great stuff. So anyway, let me get us started. We're going to start here with our Bible passage for today. So today we're looking at 2 Corinthians 4. We're looking at the very end, right here, 16 through 18. This is what Paul writes. He says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." So the reason I chose this passage is because I saw this article right here. Oh my gosh. I'm using a new computer, so sometimes I'm going to mess things up. I saw this article right here. Let me make sure this is actually working now. This is all right, excellent. Which is that Billy Graham got a Capitol statue. So if you didn't know this, like at the U.S. Capitol, each state in the United States gets to submit 2 statues of famous people from their state that they can put up, usually kind of representing their state's values or important historical people in their state and stuff like that. So North Carolina took down one of their old ones, which was of like a politician from back in the day who was very segregationist and stuff like that. And they got rid of him, and so they put up Billy Graham. And so this is one of the shots. I'm surprised they got it from the back. I don't know why they wouldn't get it from the front. Maybe it is in the article. Yeah, there you go. You can see it from the front right there. So they just unveiled this statue. And I would say, like, when we think of glory or achieving some sort of fame and stuff, like, it's this type of stuff that's at the highest level of what you could probably hope for in the United States, right? I mean, like, to have a statue of yourself in the U.S. Capitol, like, at that point you become, you know, a absolute, like, important legacy person in the United States' history. And of course, like, Billy Graham is also already has tons of stuff named after him and honored in all sorts of different ways. But, like, this is definitely, like, the glory that people think of when it comes to being glorified here on earth, right? Like having statues made of yourself and things like that. So anyway, nothing bad about that. I think that's fine. My problem isn't with this, but what it got me thinking of was, like, how do we as Christians think about glory? Because if we look at that passage from 2 Corinthians, glory in the sense that is talked about in the New Testament is the stuff that God, is for God, but also something that we get, like, we don't get through normal means, right? So I think it's really important to think about what was the idea of glory at the time that the New Testament was being written, and what is the difference between that and what Paul is talking about here, because really the difference remains pretty similar to how we should think about it and how the culture usually presents it. So the easiest way to talk about it is to look at this book, which is my favorite book, the Iliad. Obviously, everyone's going to be like, what about the Bible? To me, the Bible is my religious text. I read it every day. It's not like to me, it does have literature and literary qualities, and it's all beautiful for that, and it's amazing, but it's like in a different category than book, right? I wouldn't put it in the same category. So the Iliad is my favorite book, and I read it every summer, which is a fun fact about me. I think I've probably shared that before. That's why I think I've talked about it before, because I must have brought that up at some point. So it's coming up. What made me also think of this is that June is coming up, and that's usually when I start. So the Iliad is on my reading list again for this summer, as is always. But I wanted to talk about glory because glory plays a really important role in the Iliad. Now, I think in order to first, like, tell you why that is, we have to know the story because many people have not read the Iliad. We don't really do a classical education in the United States anymore. So unless your school goes out of the way to assign stuff from the canon, you're not really gonna read it unless you have a real interest in it, right? So the Iliad, what is the Iliad about? Well, the Iliad is the story of the Trojan War. It's the oldest one we have about it, written by Homer, who's very famous. He also wrote the Odyssey. Of course, I'm going to say all of what I'm about to say is my interpretation, my understanding of it, because lots of people will question whether or not Homer was a real person. If he was it, just one guy, or was it like a team of people that used the name? Was it all sorts of stuff? So I'm just going to talk about him as though he's real. I do think he was. I think he was an editor, if you want to know my opinion, that he edited together all of the stories and probably made them flow into one text. Or he wrote it, whatever. But he's also the author of the Odyssey too, right? Those are the two works that are associated with him, and so the ones that we have today anyway. So the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is the story of the Trojan War, and when you think about the Trojan War, we normally think of this is the movie Troy, terrible movie, can't stand it. Because I'm such a big fan, right? If you're a big fan of the Iliad, Troy and other properties are tough. But if we look at let's see, is this the poster? Is this going to be the problem with the posters? Is sometimes they're not big enough, and I also don't have internet up here. But if you look at the posters of them, you can see kind of right down here, right? You have Brad Pitt, and the other guy, Eric Bana. And you can see in the background there's the Trojan horse, right? So a lot of us know that part of the story. But the story of Troy is fairly simple. I'm sure you know it, which is that Helen of Troy was the wife of Menelaus's brother. Agamemnon's brother, Menelaus. So Menelaus is hosting a party, and Paris, who's one of the princes of Troy, seduces Helen and brings her back. Now, all of that is not in the Iliad, right? So the Iliad actually starts in the 10th year of the Trojan Wars. They've been fighting for 10 years. That's when Troy has been fated to fall. So it's following the very end of the war. Sometimes. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So anyway, the Greeks have come over to get Helen because in doing what he's doing, Paris has dishonored Menelaus. So because he's done that, the Greeks go and fight. So already you see there that honor, glory, heavily wrapped up in it, right? It's over the stealing of another guy's wife, and of course the Greeks are looking forward to plundering and taking as much as they can. And that's actually kind of how the book starts. So the book starts this way. So I have oh my gosh, this computer. I'm still getting used to it, people. Apologies. So this is from Classics MIT. So MIT just put them all this. This is you can read the whole thing online if you want. I wouldn't recommend it. And the reason I wouldn't recommend it is because it's all what's out of copyright, and so it's older translations, and not and that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that the words that they use are old because they're from the 1800s, and sometimes they don't follow conventions. So this is the Samuel Butler translation, and for instance, this one changes all of the Greek god names to their Roman names, which is to me kind of annoying. So anyway, the Iliad picks up, and it starts with a confrontation between Achilles, who's this great Greek hero, guy at the Achilles heel, all of that. That's not in the Iliad. That's later. You're going to realize that a lot of the things we associate with this are later stories that the Greeks and Romans make about the past, about these figures, right? Because this is taking place way before classical Greece is at its height. And so a lot of this is reading back into the text from people who are living hundreds of years. It's kind of like us continuing stories from the Bible right? And like adding a bunch of details, like, you know, Joshua was actually invincible besides his heel because his mom dipped him in the water or whatever, right? So all that's later. So Achilles, though, is a great warrior, and he gets into spat with Agamemnon, who's leader of the Greeks. And why does he get in a spat? Because Agamemnon takes this girl that he won as a prize. Because Agamemnon had to give up his girl because the gods were angry at him. Right? And what that does, I actually have this highlighted down here. So they're fighting back and forth, Achilles and Agamemnon. And Achilles, this is what he says. He says, Achilles scowled at him and answered, "You are steeped in insolence and lust of gain. With what heart can any of the Achaeans do your bidding?" Achaeans here means Greek, by the way. "Do your bidding, either on foray or in open fighting. I came not warring here for any ill the Trojans had done me. I have no quarrel with them. They have not raided my cattle, nor my horses, nor cut down my harvests on the rich plains of Phthia. For between me and them there is great space, both mountain and sounding sea. We have followed you, Sir Insolence, for your pleasure, not ours, to gain satisfactions from the Trojans for your shameless self and for Menelaus. You forget this and threaten to rob me of the prize for which I have toiled, and which the sons of the Achaeans have given me. Never, when the Achaeans sack any rich city of the Trojans, do I receive so good a prize as you do, though it is my hands that do the better part of the fighting. When the sharing comes, your share is far the largest, and I, forsooth, must go back to my ships, take what I can get, and be thankful, when my labor of fighting is done. Now, therefore, I shall go back to Phthia. It will be much better for me to return home with my ships, for I will not stay here, dishonored, to gather gold and substance for you." So Achilles here is complaining, right? He's complaining basically that Agamemnon has taken the girl that he won fair and square, right? Because they would go around, they would raid cities, and they would just take women and all these things. And so he was awarded this woman as prize, right? You can see how different this world really is from the world that we live in, right? Or even the world of the Bible, like, you know, Israel, the nation state of like the kingdoms of Israel and stuff were around at this time, and it's different even from kind of how it works there, right? So it's important to notice that. But the important thing is that like he's dividing up this stuff with the others, and so Achilles feels dishonored because Agamemnon has taken the girl that he won, and so what's going to happen is Achilles is going to sulk. He's going to go off and he's going to be raging in his little camp, and he's not going to help the Greeks fight. And what that's going to mean is that Hector, one of the oldest prince of Troy, he's going to just destroy the Greek ranks. He's going to kill a bunch of people, and no one's going to be able to stop him. And so, and that's what exactly happens. And the whole point of the Iliad is this tension that's going on. It's about war and about this glory and about people fighting each other and dueling each other and stuff like that. It's really worth reading. If you didn't like that, don't let this translation fool you, because this translation is old. So modern translations are really good and definitely worth reading if you haven't read it. And that's why, in case you want to know, the book starts off, and this is a common command in the ancient world, right, that you're asking the goddesses of music, the muses, right, which is where we get that from, to give you inspiration for what you're talking about. So Homer starts off and he says, "Sing, O goddess, the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus, that brought countless ills upon the Achaeans. Many a brave soul did it send hurrying down to Hades, and many a hero did it yield a prey to dogs and vultures. For so were the counsels of Jove," that's Zeus, "fulfilled from the day on which the son of Atreus, king of men, and great Achilles first fell out with one another." So the son of Atreus here is Agamemnon, right? So it starts off by saying, what is this book about? Or what is the main driving force is this rage. And the rage is brought about by this dishonor, this unglorification of Achilles, right? Because basically as you kill, you win, you take stuff, that's how you get glory. And that happens throughout the Iliad. The interesting thing is how the Iliad ends, because I said it was about the Trojan War, but if you read it, it doesn't end with the Trojan horse and the sneaking in. It ends before that. So it actually ends with a funeral for Hector, who's the prince of Troy, who gets killed. And so, I think it's interesting that it kind of, these two things are kind of bookended, right? That this is how the story goes. Is it starts with this fight over Glory, and then it ends with this celebration of Hector as this great hero of Troy. Basically, he's everything that Paris isn't. Paris is a coward. Paris is kind of considered soft and weak and too infatuated with women. Hector is kind of the strong defender of the city. They call him the bulwark of Troy, and what that means is like the wall. And so he's a big deal. And so he dies, and then it ends with him having a funeral, and that's, you can see the very, very final line of the Iliad is, "Thus then did they celebrate the funeral of Hector, tamer of horses." So it's really interesting, right? Because it's all about this glory, this earthly glory that you win by fighting, by being honorable, mostly, and by taking stuff and owning stuff and all these other sorts of things like that. And there's a lot of debate among scholars about whether or not Homer is depicting that as a good thing, or if the Iliad is actually a critique of that. We don't know. We'll never know. All of that is just speculation. But all of that is to say is that I think the glory that the Iliad is talking about is a very similar type of glory to the one that we search for, right? This kind of thing that you get deeds, you get honor from those things, and that lives on after you, and it's important. And this is what people cared about. One of the interesting things is the making of statues. Obviously, a very Greco-Roman thing. Obviously, other people made statues too. I'm not saying that it's only Western people who did, but the Greco-Roman fascination with it, right? When we think of statues of people, chances are what pops into your head is like an example of like a Greco-Roman statue. And one of the things they would do at the Olympics is they would make statues of all the winners. So if you won, you got a statue made after you. But the interesting thing is if you cheated, you also got a statue made after you. But there, right, it's like you're going to be remembered forever, and you're going to be remembered forever as a cheater, which is actually why we have names of people who did cheat in the Olympics to this day, which is pretty nuts, right? And we have the names of winners too, which is really fascinating. And so all of that I'm getting at is that the type of glory that Paul is talking about here? And the answer is no, right? So when we look at what Paul is saying, he says, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all," right? Like, Paul isn't thinking about, how to, we're going through all these problems, through, temptations and trials and difficulties and all other types of things, and that's going to make us be remembered and be super awesome forever. And that is not what Paul is talking about. So the actual glory, the word that Paul uses here is doxa. Doxa is like the Koine Greek word for glory. The word that's used in classical Greek and in Homeric Greek is kleos. Haven't done enough research to tell you if there's a massive difference between the two, but my guess is that the glory, right, that they're talking about is different. Like, and it might be in Paul's mind that what he's comparing the Christian life to is to kind of what the prevailing culture around them believed about glory, right? So the Romans and Greeks had this Iliad idea of glory, which is why they would build massive monuments to themselves and stuff like that. But here, right, what Paul is saying is that this eternal glory goes far beyond anything that makes it difficult and far beyond anything that we achieve in this world, because it's eternal, right? The thing about this current age that we live in is nothing is completely eternal. And I think that that's worth remembering, because as we live in this world, we have to, as Christians, decide how are we going to carry ourselves. And so many of us are tempted to carry ourselves in the way that the world carries itself. But for Christians, we have to remember that that's not how we are supposed to carry ourselves. So we are supposed to not focus on our legacy and being remembered forever on this planet, because everything here is going to end, right? It's going to be made new. So what we really should be worrying about is, have we achieved that eternal glory? Now, of course, what we do doesn't achieve the glory. That's done through Christ and his sacrifice on the cross. But in our running of the race, as Paul would say, are we moving towards that, or are we moving away from it? And I think that it should free us up, because so many of us, I think this idea of winning glory is dealing with the reality of death and whether or not people will remember us. But I think that one of the important things we need to recall is that we are going to be remembered. And so how do we, in our lives today, honor other people around them by calling them out of seeking the things of this life, right? And going towards Christ. If I can have like one more anecdote, right? What I've told many people that I like to go to like cemeteries and stuff. I find that interesting. And it's interesting to go to cemeteries and see all the big like mausoleums and stuff. I remember I went to Sleepy Hollow, New York, Tarrytown. This is what it's called now. And there's a big cemetery there, which is pretty famous. It has a lot of names in it, but you see these massive, massive mausoleums for people. They're like I think it's the Rockefellers have one there and stuff like that. Just huge, right? But the interesting thing is no one cares. No one remembers that guy. Like, it's not the big Rockefeller. It was like his brother or something like that. No one knows who he is. And it's not a disparaging of his life at all. I know nothing about the guy or any of the millions of other people that when you walk through a cemetery you see, and you know nothing about them. They're just a name or a last name on a tombstone with the dates of birth and death, but you know nothing. And I think that that's really important for us to remember, is that, we can think that we've done so much, but at the end of the day, right, it's not about what we do here that really is ultimately going to matter, because unless we are like just world changing in our what we do, or if we're just lucky enough to be remembered because we happen to live like the pharaohs in a part of the world where it's easy to say the environment keeps things safe because it's dry, right, and it doesn't rot away, then we are most likely going to be forgotten, and that's okay. And the reason it's okay for us to remember that is because we are not forgotten, even if we're forgotten here on earth, because the eternal glory is the one that we've earned through Jesus' sacrifice on the cross and what he's done for us, and that God remembers. And so it's not about like, oh, how are people generations from now going to think about me? It's like, what am I doing to make sure that as many people around me are able to access that eternal glory through what Christ has done for us? And so I just think that's important to think about, because so often we fetishize, or we look forward, or we desire to be remembered, or to be famous, or to be important and powerful, and all other sorts of things. But we have to understand that is so temporary. And we have to, maybe that is part of the Iliad, is that people would make that argument, is that even though they fight for this, right, they're dead. And is it really worth it at that point? Anywho, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys found that somewhat interesting. It's always great to talk about the Iliad. I love talking about the Iliad. So I will see you guys on Sunday for worship. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Peace out.